I'll never forget how well you handled yourself when, so is this what, summer of 2022? And you were faced with all these challenges with your daughter's health, and also were like going through the process of being promoted into a leadership position and everything going on at work. And it was just, I'd never seen somebody like handle their business the way you did. Like I've seen a lot of people like go through tough times, but you were 100% like on the ball the whole way, and just putting yourself aside. Like you were being a man, dude. You were like straight up just, what I feel is not important right now. What's important is my daughter and the mission. And I was like, hell yeah. I felt like I was in the military again.
Yeah, I mean, that was that. I mean, although it was just for the benefit of the people listening, my daughter developed type 1 diabetes, so there was, rush to hospital and things. But that it just felt like that was the way I had to act to support her, and how to describe it, to assist her with this new journey she was going to be on, having to do the tests and inject with insulin and stuff like that. And it just felt natural to do what I was doing. It was like nobody told me, because it was just me and her. We were on our own. My parents saying things, but nobody had ever dealt with type 1 diabetes directly in the family. So, but the hospital were good as well. I mean, they were kind of, they were guiding us. They were telling us about the history of diabetes. It's like, is it diabetes mellitus or something? And actually, there's a Latin translation and it means sweet pea. And it's like, how did somebody discover that? Did somebody actually drink somebody's pee? And it turns out way back, it was like, one of these pharaohs or something like that.
Yeah.
That's how they tasted it. And it tasted sweet because of the sugar was in it.
Yep.
And it just, there's one of these weird stories you hear.
There's so many weird stories like that. Like I heard that basically like leavened bread, like the idea of having bread with yeast in it so that it rises instead of just being flat bread, like what you see in the Middle East, was because like somebody in Egypt just like knocked over a beer into the bread, and they were like, it'll be okay. And then they come back later and it's risen. Like the dough had risen. They're like, oh my God, the secret ingredient is to put beer in your bread. But there's so many crazy things like that, or, like.
Yeah. Plus it makes it go so much further as well. So.
True. Yeah.
So that'd be handy.
Was it scary for you? Like the day that, cause I feel like you were told me like she was at school when you found out.
Well, yeah, it was our first week of school when we came back to Scotland, and I got a call at lunchtime.
Yeah.
And said that she wasn't able to eat. So she came back, and then, she seemed okay. And then, but by the time the Thursday night came, she'd actually been sick. And then she said she was really tired. She wanted to go to bed, and she was kind of breathing a bit heavy. And I thought, that doesn't seem right. And we went to the hospital, and then it was like an hour or two before we knew what it was. They suspected diabetes. And then later on it was confirmed, but she was in a coma for a couple of days.
Jesus.
She's in the diabetes coma, but they were giving her fentanyl and stuff to keep her, in a deep coma, because to try and stop her brain from swelling. Because that was the big worry, because her numbers were so high that they actually didn't expect her to survive. So
I remember it was really, really scary. Like on my part, I'm not the one on the ground. I was, so for some context here, everyone, this is like, Robert is at the time, the lead programmer, and I'm the producer, like project manager on Kingpin Reloaded. We're both working for 3D Realms / Slipgate Ironworks at the time. And so you had told me, oh my gosh, like I've got to go deal with this. And I was like, hey, dude, nothing's more important than the health of your child. Like, I don't care. I will handle whatever goes on over here. And we had like a presentation, like it was like every week, all the project managers and whatnot had a presentation where it was like to the boss and everybody, like, this is where we're at with every project. And I remember it being kind of unique because, most producers had, one thing that they were in charge of. And I had 3 different games at the time. One of them we're not going to talk about. The other one was Combustion. And then the other one is you. And you had told me that, and they were like, so what's the update? And I had changed all the slides to be like, on pause, what do he's like, what do you need, or what do you need from leadership? Like time, patience. Like, I just told him straight up, like, yeah, we're not doing anything. Like this project is paused. And then I just messaged everybody. I was like, just send your invoices in as usual. Keep working on whatever you're working on, but like, don't do anything new until we know what the situation is with Robert. Because,
Yeah.
I was like, and damn anybody to tell me otherwise. Because, what are you going to say? Like, is it going to be late? Like, there's no timeline. There's no budget. There's no, we'll get into all that stuff too. There's no budget. There's no fucking due date. There's no milestone plan. You just handed me a shit sandwich. So don't argue with me about this. And to be fair, no one was. Everybody was super like, oh, dude, yeah, go take care of that first.
Yeah, I was very pleased with the reaction of the management, and right all the way up to Fred. So everybody was very supportive. So I'm very thankful for that.
Yeah, man.
But to everybody else listening, that was one of the significant delays in the project. I mean, that was a month I was off, and it took me time to ramp back up again afterwards.
Yeah.
Because obviously I was still dealing with my daughter.
So when did you first, because it was a long time, like in development, but when did you first get pulled into Kingpin?
Well, as far as I knew, there was an announcement was in February of 2020, and it was at some show or something, but I can't remember the name. It was a CES or something, whatever show it was. And then there was radio silence until about April. And funnily enough, I was on Discord that night and we were chatting away in the Kingpin channel, and I had previously written a multiplayer client. You can actually connect and play Kingpin multiplayer on this client I wrote. It wasn't finished. There was no effects, but there was real-time rendering. Some of the lighting was done and stuff like that. And I posted about it on Discord. I said, at least if it doesn't work out, there's always my client. And then next morning, once my hangover, because I cleared this, I noticed there was a message from Fred. So I contacted Fred and we had a chat, another chat, and then I was brought into the project. And that's the first thing I did was the reverse engineering. And that took a bit. And then there was the models. Because of the way the models work, it's like the MDX format is like multiple MD2s.
Right.
Anybody that knows Quake programming and the way the models are laid out, they'll know what an MD2 is. And so I programmed that, and then there was the looking at the engine, and the way it was getting done, it would have been done all with Unity and their navigation meshes and things. And it would never have worked. And it would never have worked with the hub system because we didn't have any map sources. See, this is what, you may want to cut this bit out after, but this is one thing that really gets me about people saying, give it to Night Dive, okay? Night Dive.
Yeah. We're not cutting
that.
We're keeping this.
Okay. I'll say what I was going to say now. Because this is the way I really feel quite strong about this. Night Dive have sources for everything, which makes it easy. If I had the sources for Quake and Quake 2, I could have done what they did on my own. Not to blow my trumpet too much, but all they've done is they've chopped the maps up that they had the sources for. They've done this, they've done that. They've added a couple of outside bits. The lighting is very basic. I mean, Kingpin has got real-time lighting when you fire a projectile, and that's what they have. They don't have shadows on their entities or anything. I think the lifts, I don't think they have shadows. I don't remember them. The NPCs, they don't have shadows, nothing. So it's like, why is everybody saying Night Dive? We don't have any source. The only source code we had was the logic, and that still had to be converted into C# and made into classes and things.
Yeah.
But the rest of it was I could even touch the Quake 2 source because there's no way to get a license for it. So that's why it was hard and took a long time, because we had nothing to work with. If we had the model sources, we could at least have moved it from keyframe onto bones, and everything would look nice. There'd be no wobble anymore, although that's part of its charm, I think. And we could have relit the levels and things and stitched them together into massive levels, and we could have had our hub system and had lovely real-time lighting all over the place. but it wasn't possible. So
I want to like say this before we get too deep into it. Like there's a lot of controversy, of course. Like if anybody cares to go look at the reviews, if you're not already into Kingpin or whatever, about how this game was received, how it was delivered, the way that just the communication with the audience was handled. And there are so many factors in that of course I was under lock and key about, for obvious reasons, just NDA, not wanting to say the wrong thing. And I intend to maybe not dispel, but explain a lot of that now, or, as we go. And hopefully it'll give people, like, even if they still hate the game, and I don't mind at all if you don't like it, that's not the point. But just to understand how we got to the point we're at with it would be really nice for a lot, especially the particularly harsh reviewers. And I get it, like, at the end of the day, I received a game that didn't make me happy, so therefore it gets a negative review. Nobody's arguing with that. But I always want people to remember that, first of all, game development is hard, and when you're online and you're telling people like fuck you and just saying awful nasty things to them about a fucking video game, like there are A, human beings on the other side, and B, you don't know what it takes to do what they do. So I think this is a like almost perfect project to illustrate what can go wrong and why and how.
I mean, the lack of source really was the main one. If we had the sources, then it would have been a lot easier and a lot faster. And a lot of the issues that remain would have been, they could have been mitigated a lot earlier. So, but I mean, it's like people online. I mean, I was, have people insult me and stuff, that I was stupid and I don't know how to program and stuff like that. I'm thinking, who is this person that's saying this? It's a nobody. I mean, what is your background? It's like, I sweep the streets or something. Well, you don't know how to program then. So it's like, I mean, it eventually got to be like water off a duck's back. I mean, it's like, we did the best we could with what we had. So
yeah,
and the time we had, and because a lot of people also forget the layoffs. We were given, this is it, or it doesn't go out at all. So
yeah,
I'm sure I can say that, still under NDA, but it was we were all getting laid off. So that was the state it was released in.
Well, we got a lot of stuff between those two things. So the mass layoffs happened at the end of 2023, like December 2023, almost a year ago now, is when like it began, it had already begun happening industry wide. And it was kind of like, well, when's our turn sort of thing. And especially associated at the time, no longer, but with Embracer. So Embracer at that time owned Saber and thus owned 3D Realms, Gearbox, and a ton of other game studios, but and Slipgate. So when they started that, it was kind of clear like this will eventually come around. So, but between December of 23 and 2020 when you came on the project, a lot of things happened. I didn't come along until the end of 21, I want to say. So it was probably like almost 2 years after you had gotten involved when I started working as a producer for the company. I think it was October. Like my first day was like October 1st. So there was a lot of change of hands, like different people, moving in and out, going to different projects or whatever. But when I came on, if I remember correctly, it was like you, another programmer who hopefully I'll have on the show at some point too, named Josh. And then we had our art guys. So it was like, and Dimitri, I don't want to forget Dimitri, who went on to be an amazing porting programmer, but was pulled from the project at a certain point. And then it was Carlos, Jorge, and Eduardo as our art team. And so the way that I took it over, I took this project on from the previous producer, who I think he was dramatically overwhelmed because there were so many projects going on at the time. So I was just kind of like, okay, what do you need me to do here? What's the lay of the land? How do I move this forward? And so the way that I saw it was I have you guys on the programming side and I have an art team, and the deal that we have with our customer, who was Interplay, who's licensing us the game to put out so that we can all make money together. Their expectation is essentially we're going to remaster. Remaster and remake get interchanged so much, but just to be very clear about the definition here, a remake would be like if you take the idea of a game and you make a whole new game from scratch with that idea. So Doom 2016 or Wolfenstein, the Old Blood, or the New Order, like that. You're completely remaking an idea. This was supposed to be the same game, but delivered with quality of life improved. So, maybe better graphics options, more menu options, just things that you would expect from a modern game, but it's still the same game. That's what we were charged with.
Yeah, running on a modern hardware, widescreen, these kind of things, all the things that Night Dive do with when they've got sources. Mm-hmm. Cut that bit.
No, it's okay. We can talk. I'm friends with Night Dive. Like, hey, Larry, I just got my t-shirt in the mail the other day. Thank you for sending it. Like, it's cool. I don't think they would even argue with you. They know what you're talking about. They're programmers. So
yeah, I mean, I don't really want to go dissing Night Dive in case I have to go and apply for a job with them one day.
You're not dissing them by saying, like, it's a fact that people say, if you just gave it to Night Dive, they could do it. But what you're used to seeing in the media is like Night Dive does all these amazing remakes. They do. When they do them, they usually have the source code for that game, so it's easier to do than it is for someone like yourself who doesn't have access to that. Mm-hmm. But so from the jump, we're being asked to remaster a game that we recreate the original game, and we don't have the original source port for that. So if anybody, I'm not a programmer myself. I'm just right off the jump understand how difficult that is alone. Mm-hmm. And this is in the Quake 2 engine. So anybody out there who's familiar with the licensing for id Software's engines, it's not as simple as just, we can just use that. It's like, oh no, we have to, in your case, recreate it in Unity. So there's just multiple layers of, from the start, from day one, you're up against, your Sisyphus pushing a rock up a hill to make this happen.
Yeah. And that's not even counting the lack of map source code, the model sources, well, not map source code, but the map sources so we can play about with them. There was things like I wanted to put entities and stuff in for light probes and stuff, and I can't do it. There's no way to do it. Uh-huh. I mean, some of the entities I had to put in for detecting secrets. I mean, I had to go in and to decompiled maps, draw out boxes and things, note the coordinates and, the bounding box and the centroid and things, and then use code to add them in after the map was loaded, because there's no other way to do it. It's just a big pain.
Yeah.
So sorry for interrupting.
No, dude, this is your podcast. You're the subject. If I'm interrupting, it's my fault. But and then throughout the course of the end of, I think it was, I came in end of 21, and then by the beginning of 22, I'm fully onboarded into the project. I'm what am I expected to deliver is a game with all new textures, upscaled textures. So that's my art team. And then I'm trusting blindly, basically, my programming team, which was led by you, to make the game function correctly while the art team works. And that's my mission, to deliver that product. And then, through the course of that year, we were able to kind of pull together a timeline. This is what that looks like. These are all I had to go off of in terms of what are the features expected of this project was the ones on the end slate at the end of the first trailer they put out for it. So that original Kingpin Reloaded trailer that you saw that you ended up applying for the job for, that list at the end of that trailer is all of the documentation I had for what is expected of this. That's it. There was nothing else. There was no there was no real document. I don't even think I saw a contract between Interplay and 3D Realms. I'm not saying one didn't exist. I'm just saying I never laid eyes on it. So I don't know. I'm just going off of what I'm told to do.
There was a design document, though, because I had to write one when I came on board. There wasn't one when I came in, so I went and wrote it was still quite high level, though. It was we need this, and then, it wasn't, this graphic subsystem will have, this function, this. So it was very high level because there was nothing when I came on board.
Okay.
So,
And
but so
then
you may not have seen it though, but
that's okay. I mean, it's also possible that I forgot because there was a lot of things going on. But
yeah,
I'm just we had our lay of the land. Like, this is our mission. This is actually what we are doing with this project. And then we had the duration of 22 to work on it. And we were meanwhile we were struggling with this thing where we did not control the Steam page. It was like, so
no,
it still, even after like due dates got changed or whatever, like we could not do anything about it. All we could do is ask Interplay to fix it. And I'm not throwing anybody at Interplay under the bus, because I know, just like every other games company at the time, people were changing hands. Nobody knows who's in charge of what in certain cases, like especially when you're handing a project from person to person to person. Half the time when I'm like, hey guys, what's going on with this? The person talking to me is like, oh, I didn't realize. I didn't even know that that was a problem. Let me go talk to whoever I need to talk to. That happens in organizations. I get that. And I'm still, to this day, like pretty close with some of the folks that I worked with at Interplay. So this is not meant to disparage them. It's just that we could not change it. So that we're getting all this feedback from people on the net, in forums and whatnot, saying like, oh, you lied, you did this, you did that. It's like, we can't do a damn thing about it. And I think we worked on it for that full, pretty much that a year. And then it was like towards the end of the summer when I decided to leave production and go to marketing. Like, so I jumped from the production team over to the marketing team. And that was like exactly the same time that you had this problem with your daughter. So then we basically decided to, like, first of all, to give you the time you needed to deal with that. And then I was going to move to the marketing team, and you were going to be elevated from lead programmer to director of the whole game.
yeah.
And if I'm incorrect about any of this shit, just like call me out, because it's all a blur. But so then at this point, I'll walk away. Yeah. So then there's a gap where I don't know what's going on necessarily until I eventually come back. I make my epic comeback then almost a full year later, I think. But,
yeah. I mean, really what happened after you left was we just, the plans were, looked at, and like, here's what we have to do. We'll just carry on and work through it. And then, was basically skipping ahead to Realms Deep 2023. That was round about the end of this. There was the information came down from on high that a date had to be picked, and December the 5th it was.
Yeah.
I think if I remember it was either December the 5th or February, but in retrospect, February would have been too late because things were accelerated before then for the layoffs. So it was probably just as well it was December the 5th. But yeah, it was continually working through and just working on the systems that, I mean, because of even the advanced mode as well, we weren't able to, I mean, the Quake 2 source code would have been useless at that point for the enhanced mode. Because, I mean, having to make up the graphics and deciding what effects we can squeeze in at the time. I mean, there was things like the water that ended up getting, there was no time to properly fix the water reflections and things. There was kind of fake reflections in it. And then I think it was after the first or second patch I took them out because there was just no time to do it properly. A lot of these things were placeholders at the time. So, like, I need an environment probe here so I can get reflections, but there was never any time to try and squeeze it into a map and then try and render something, even for offline, so things were removed.
When was the decision made not to have, because it was never in the discussion from when I joined, like there was not going to be a multiplayer for the game?
Multiplayer was mentioned a few times, but it was more mentioned online than in the chat. The priority was to get the single player game going, and then we could use the engine and go from there to possibly make a multiplayer engine. And because the way they work are completely different. I mean, the single player wasn't built like a client and a server internally. Anybody that knows about the way like the ID engines work, usually there's a client side and there's an engine side, and then there's like a local buffer that can run at full speed between the client and server side. There was no time to do anything like that. It was like single player, we'll worry about multiplayer later.
Mm-hmm.
And then at some point it was decided there will be no multiplayer because we don't have time. And it'd be too difficult anyway. And doing it on Unity, I mean, there'd be no on-demand downloads or anything. Because with Unity, it's you can't actually... Well, you can if you write a lot of your own systems, but you can't use Unity internals to load from outside their archive format.
Right.
It's just it's very inflexible. I mean, I think I said quite near the start. I mean, if I was choosing an engine, it wouldn't be Unity, because the amount of workarounds I had to use, because Unity is designed primarily for people that are learning, and their systems are very complicated to actually get to do anything over and above something simple. I mean, Kingpin uses keyframe animation. There is no function at all within Unity for keyframe animation. Because of the way they've structured their internals, the most efficient way to do it was using compute buffers,
mm-hmm.
which means you got to have a fully DirectX 11 compliant video card to do it. Even though you can do it in DirectX 10, but Unity won't allow you to do it unless you're at fully DirectX 11 for some reason. And the other way is just to keep on, constantly updating meshes every time your frame changes, and then you've still got to learn between them, your old frame and new frame, based on where you are along the animation. So Unity wasn't a thing I would have used, and it means that some things are inflexible.
The way that I make sense of it in my head as a non-programmer is I think about Unity like it's the IKEA of, if you were like a master carpenter and then you're like, just assemble this IKEA desk, and then you look at a piece and you're like, oh, I would have made this a different way, but it's like, well, that's the piece. That's how, it's stupid proof in that you can go from A to B with no skills, other than turning a wrench or a screwdriver or and whatever to make this come together, and it will stand up, but it doesn't give you the ability to, make creative choices in the same way that a more robust engine would allow.
Yeah, I mean, even before I started working on Kingpin, it was like, you see all these games and it was like, guess the Unity game, because everything looks the same. It's like, it's like shaders. I mean, there might be a bit of it might take account of light direction, but everything is really samey. And I mean, some people can do some really fantastic stuff in Unity, but a lot of the stuff you see on, like, I've got an Xbox, so it's like you buy a lot of games on there, and it's like they all look the same. It's like, anything that's 3D, it's like that's very basic, flat shaded polygons, but although they might have a bit of lighting on them depending on the direction, but it's like, even my daughter, I mean, she can identify a Unity game from almost 20 feet away. It's like, Unity, same as like all Unreal games look the same now because everybody just uses the same things.
Yeah.
Nobody writes anything on their own, so it all looks the same. It's like, switch this thing on, switch that thing on.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, it was very interesting. So I went away from the project because I was just focused on marketing. You mentioned Realms Deep and all that stuff. And then I think it was later my colleague Vince, who has been and will continue hopefully in the future to be on the show as a guest. But he was I think what we call brand manager of the project, which is basically like being like marketing project manager. Like you're just essentially in charge of making sure that everything has a plan for how the games are going to release, trailers, all that kind of stuff. Then I was eventually given this the same job title, and he and I basically split the work. So it was like he was going to take a certain amount of titles, and I was going to take a certain amount of titles. And obviously, I was like, oh, I want my hands on the projects that I had been producer on. So I got Kingpin, Combustion, Core Decay, a few other things, and I was super stoked to be back involved in the game. But it was so crazy because as we were getting towards release, it was like all these layoffs are happening. Like it was just so like short on personnel that I was almost like hybrid back to being producer on Kingpin while also being the marketing manager for it, which is like, shit happens. We make it work.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, for me, it was like, I was like simultaneously really happy to be back working with our team and also like picking up all the pieces that were, falling apart as we were working with less and less people. I mean, just like, I think it was before I had gone away in the first place, but we had basically had to give up two of our other, your entire programming team basically were like moved to another project. And then I was like, well, what are we going to do we just have one programmer who's trying to run the whole game. And then we were given Elijah, who I think was brought in. He was like hired as a porting programmer. And then it was just like, hey, Unity, go help the Kingpin guys. And then just forever, ever after that, like he's just your secondhand man on Kingpin.
Yeah.
And so then it was like just the three. Once the art team was done, it was just the three of us until release.
Yeah, well, Ben was on the UI. He was.
That's right. I forgot Ben. I'm so sorry, Ben. I love you, bro. Yeah.
Yeah, he was there almost from the start, I think.
Mm-hmm. I think he was there definitely before I came on, because I think he was like in our first meeting. Dude, I feel like such a jackass, Ben. I'm sorry. I was just not thinking about you, bro. I love you.
Yeah, the UI is important.
It was really difficult to make decisions about the UI, I remember, because you got, there's the original UI, what it looks like, and then there was also like this weird thing with the Pawnomatic, right, where it's like you actually enter a different level for the Pawnomatic. What was so, like, why was that such a fucking pain in the ass?
It's just the Pawnomatic in the original game was basically, crap. I mean, all you had was these, a menu either side, and you used the arrow keys, to move between them. And even in Kingpin, they had the use key, like, to open doors, but you used the activate key from Quake to select the menu items. So, I mean, there's things that has to be changed, but we wanted to do things like, like race stabbing and things, so that you look at a machine gun, and that's how you would buy it. But we didn't have time to do these things. And plus we need to, kind of juggle the levels a bit anyway. So, but it's the way it ended up, because of you need to be able to do it by mouse as well, because you couldn't do that in the original.
Right.
And Reloaded, you can actually point at the things. So there's like hidden buttons on the screen so that you can click on these things, and then the joystick control as well. I mean, there was really silly things like when you go into the level, the way the player sits, it's like the player's crouched and he's on this little box at the spawn point, and it's like, why did they do that? Why not just make the player stand up?
Yeah.
So you've got to take account of these things when you go into the Pawnomatic. It's just these really little weird design decisions in the original game. It's like, why? But yeah, it's like the Pawnomatic is, it ended up the way it's pretty close to the original, but it's not what we wanted. But as the time and was the killer really for that.
Yeah. There are so many so I remember when I was onboarding, and you and Adonis had given me a lot of like resources and like basically research to do on Kingpin itself. Like, what is this game? What was it? Just understanding the way it was originally designed, and that just the original launch of Kingpin Life of Crime was a whole task for me. Like I did so much research and reading all of these interviews with the original developers, and like just trying to understand, what is Kingpin? What is the essence of like philosophy class or some shit, And so it seems like it was kind of the same situation almost at the beginning, where it's like, okay, we got this engine, the Quake 2 engine, we're going to make a badass game in it. And the original idea was for it to be like this 1930s Art Deco, the movie Metropolis.
Past. Yeah.
Yeah, like this idea of what the future would look like now from the perspective of the 1930s. So it had a very specific like art way, like everything about it. I'm doing a very poor job of articulating myself, but it's supposed to look and feel, and the setting of the game is this very Art Deco, very Metropolis inspired thing, to the point where the technology in the game is all like steam and like Nikola Tesla inspired stuff, down to the Tesla coil being a weapon.
Yeah.
And then as they're progressing through the development,
the Tesla coin.
Go ahead.
The Tesla coin, that's a different game, I think.
The Tesla coil?
Yeah. You said it was a weapon.
Am I tripping?
Possibly, yeah. I think this will be a bit of a cut. It's
No, I'm not going to cut it. I'll just sound like an idiot.
There's a coil in it that you collect as one of the quests, but the weapons are like the pistol, the shotgun, the Tommy gun. There's an HMG, which people are still trying to work out what weapon it's based on. There's a grenade launcher, rocket launcher, and there's a flamethrower. And that's it. The Tesla gun was that's Half-Life 2, I think.
Okay, maybe I'm tripping saying it's a weapon. It's an item called the Tesla coil. So it's like the technology of this game is inspired by what would have been considered to be the future of the world in 1930. That is the point I'm trying to make. So I apologize for saying it's a weapon or an ammo. That's me tripping. And you're right that I think that is Half-Life. Whatever. I'll just sound like a dummy for a second.
Happens to us all.
Yeah. So they had this vision, and then they also had this idea that it would be like each level would have a hub, and then you would have missions to go on in that hub. And then after like the second level, they gave up on that and made a linear first-person shooter like Doom or Quake.
Yeah.
And
I think they ran out. I think because Zashik ran out of time as well. Apparently.
Yeah, they ran out of time, and they were like, just get it done. So like, well, we don't have time to do all these complex hub levels. We're just gonna keep rolling with a straight up shooter. And if you go watch like YouTube reviews of the original game, everyone brings this up. It's like, it goes from being this thing with missions and a hub map to walk, shoot, walk, shoot, walk, shoot, pretty quickly. And another thing that changes is that somewhere along the lines, I forget exactly when, I think it was towards the end though, they acquire the rights to Cypress Hill's music. And because of that, they decide, okay, we need to pivot from this dystopian future to gangsta. And I mean, I think I'm using the terminology of the time. Like, it needs to be like that. And so then they're like, what's popular in the late 90s, Pulp Fiction, Natural Born Killers, Quentin Tarantino stuff. Like, so Marcellus Wallace is obviously a big inspiration on the Kingpin, etc.
Yeah, including the plaster on the back of his neck.
But you still have all of these artifacts, especially in the decor of what the original idea of the game was, which was to be this like, I think on Wikipedia it says like Blade Runner with a, that kind of thing. Like that is the idea.
I mean, there's supposed to be like a motorbike level as well. Like you say, at the end of the first hub, that's what was left of it. But there is code in the original source, and there was actually a mod made called Speedway Mod that uses the motorbike code. And there was in the SDK, there's actually a very large map you can, and that was used for whatever it's going to be used for races and fighting and stuff. So I think there's been that one, and I think some other maps made where you can drive along and you can shoot from the motorbike and things.
Right.
But so it was kind of nice that they made it, left in. But I'm sure there was supposed to be something like a jetpack as well. And there's a couple of things that there's in the source code, but they just never implemented it, like acid shells and stuff.
Right. And so for me, being born in 1995, and I did not play Kingpin in 1999 or at all until basically when I saw as a fan 3D Realms announced like, oh, we're remaking this, we're going to use the word classic game. I assumed, oh wow, it must be some classic game I've somehow never heard of. Like at that time in my career, I was doing the podcast and I was like really researching all the best FPS games. And Kingpin was not on my radar of any of these, classic way. Even amongst like the Quake 2 games, there's Kingpin, there's Soldier of Fortune, there's Daikatana,
Sin.
Sin, yeah, and Kingpin was like not even one of the ones that people would still bring up and say like, oh, you got to play this classic game. So I figure I'm ignorant and I've just missed out on this gem of a game. And I know that we can talk about your background with Kingpin too, because I know you were around, but I wasn't. So when I first, start researching and picking up the game and trying it out and stuff, I'm like, so what had happened here was the reason why this game is still important to people is because the multiplayer community is epic. Like there's still people who still play Kingpin Life of Crime multiplayer to this day and continue to do that the entire time. And no one ever gave a flying fuck about the single player campaign because it wasn't very good. And so now we're faced with this task of like, okay, we're going to reload this game that's only still relevant for the multiplayer. We're going to make the single player good again. And even if we verbatim, like exactly remade the single player campaign as it was in every conceivable way, you're remaking something that was already not the best thing in the world. So that was something that I just had to come to grips with pretty early on. But I'm interested because you have a completely different timeline with your experience with the game. So when did you first play Kingpin? How did you get involved in it? All that stuff.
Yeah, I think the first time I played it was around about 2000. So I'm showing my age here.
Yep.
And I'm quite a bit older. Well, not quite a bit.
I was 5.
Bit older than you. I was... well, I won't say. I mean, people have seen me on Realms Deep, so they know I'm not a spring chicken anyway. Yeah, but I played it the first time about 2000, and that was way back before ADSL. My first game on it was a 56k modem with a 200 ping on the Wireplay servers down to London. I think it was they were located, and then discovered Demon. That was my first multiplayer. But I did play the single player a few times. I mean, I've played that quite a few times, but there was still some secrets that I didn't discover until making Reloaded, and I won't say what those are because they are basically kind of they count towards achievements in Reloaded. So, but anyway, it's playing the multiplayer. There was not a lot of multiplayer, custom maps back then, but the one everybody loved was KPDM5, which is the one in the Central Towers. So, in response to that, I wrote a Last Man Standing mod, which at the time people didn't like having to wait until the end of a level. And then I made a few others after that. But I've been in the scene since 2000 roughly. Made a couple of maps, some mods, some patches.
That's amazing.
That's about it.
Though, like...
Yeah, so... Well, actually, I've also made a VR mod for it as well, which is incomplete. And on top of the multiplayer client as well, which I may or may not complete one of these days. It's still a lot of work.
What got you into gaming in the first place? Like, when did that begin for you?
My first foray into gaming was I had an Atari 2600, the VCS, and then into programming was when I bought a ZX81 off one of my pals in school when I was 12, and I wrote my first game on that. And I lost the source code. When I moved to France, it was on a tape in a box, and I threw the box out. I should have kept it. Anyway, that's another story. But it was my first game, and I did some machine code on it. I wasn't very good at it. I didn't have any assemblers. I was just like typing these into REM statements and stuff, and having to poke the alternative values because there's a command in like Z80, was it the CB, I think the value is, and then that gives you the alternative instruction. Anyway, and then I had an Amiga, wrote some things on that in 68,000, then got a PC, wrote some games on that. Some of them are available on my website, but they're all DOSBox things.
Right.
And which is captaindeath.com, in case anybody's wondering.
We'll put it in the show notes too.
Cool. And well, then life getting in the way. It's like, you have to earn money, so you go and, go to uni, get a job, and then you meet somebody, get married. Then moved to France, and my daughter was born. So I was it worked out. It was cheaper for me to actually stay and look after her than for me to go out and to work and pay somebody to look after her.
Yeah.
So I was the stay at home. But in that time, I was still programming away, learning, DirectX 11 and things like that. And then obviously Kingpin came along and the Reloaded came along in 2020. So, but I've always had I wouldn't say I'm an avid gamer. I don't follow all these gaming channels. I think I've got Jared on my Twitch. I've got 3D Realms, and I think I might have Tasty Spleen, and I think that's about it. I don't actually go in and watch them because I'm usually sitting programming or life gets in the way.
Yeah.
So that's probably an average story about somebody in the gaming, but again in the programming, it's like I think it was just I would like to write something like that, and it just happened. It's because I've always been like when I was younger, I had the advantage of no, I'm really going to show my age on this. Let's just say I like to look inside broken televisions when I was younger and say, oh, what's this? This is a transistor, and then the ICs, the integrated circuit started coming out.
Oh, look, a Tesla coil. No, I'm just...
Well, some of the coils in it are, there was one point it was like I had an old television and I'd taken the circuit board off it, and the line output transformer, some people call it a flyback transformer, and that's what gives you the high voltage for the tube.
Right.
And I had that connected up to a coil of copper wire, and I was lighting up fluorescent tubes for my disc and stuff like that. But it ended up giving me headaches and stuff like that, so I had to end up stopping. But it was funny, like, oh, touch that wire there, and it's like somebody would get a spark. It's like high voltage but extremely low current.
Mm-hmm.
So it's it gives somebody a shock just for fun. But I didn't do that too often because it's not nice sometimes. If you actually grab the wire, it can be really disturbing. But that's the things you do in your young days. So it's just a case of, it's like, how do these things work? I've got that kind of inclination, and then programming was like, how does this game work?
It's very, I don't know, it's just very strange to me because, like, I took exactly 2 programming courses, neither of which I finished, and both times it led me to the conclusion that this is the last thing in the world I want to do. Like, I don't know if it's like a patience thing or what, but my brain doesn't seem to work that way. So it's always really interesting when I feel like what you do, like whether that be your profession or just kind of like the way your brain thinks, can sort of lead you in certain paths in life. Like if you were a mathematician, you're going to kind of think about everything in terms of math. If you're a programmer, you're going to kind of think about the world in terms of like it's programmed. Or if you're I don't know, if you're a history major, you're probably going to think about everything in terms of like, well, how did this, the situation I'm in, how did it come to be? And that sort of thing. I think I heard Dan Carlin say that once, but yeah, was there something about your brain, like, you're taking apart TVs and putting them back together and stuff, like, did you always sort of feel like you had that ability to see the bigger picture amongst smaller details? Or...
Well, possibly. I think my parents might have seen that because I got it was a Philips. This is a German company. They used to make electronic kits, and I think I got my first one when I was 6. So there you go. That's really showing my age. And I learned a lot on that, and it altered the circuits and make sound effects and stuff like that. And it was like say to my mother, press this button here, and she's like, no, I don't want to. She didn't know what it was going to do. It would just make a sound or something like that. But because I've got people that know me know I've got an extremely weird sense of humour.
Yeah.
Sometimes I have to explain my jokes, so might think it's an insult, but it's actually, I find it funny, but it's like kind of really abstract humour sometimes. So sometimes I need to be careful because not everybody gets it. If I've got to explain a joke, then it's the delivery's wrong, I think. Maybe it's just my delivery.
I think there's also a factor in this where it's like cultural. So one of the really interesting things as an American, talking about like comedy in general, like the way that jokes get made, is that like British comedy versus or just UK comedy as a whole versus American comedy.
Mm-hmm.
In the UK, if you're watching like Monty Python or Peep Show or I don't know, I'm gonna make myself sound old too. Like, what's the Black Books? You know, these really great classic UK sitcoms, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
The humor is highly contextual. Like you need to understand a bunch about history or like the situation that they're in and the place where they live in order to laugh at the joke. Because if you don't know that who Queen Elizabeth is, this joke isn't funny. If you know in the Holy Grail, like if you don't know the story of King Arthur, the movie is not funny. It's just like this, a bunch of happenstance stuff happens.
Yeah, but even some of the visual humour, I mean, you must think,
Mm-hmm.
you know, why are they, you know, pretending they're riding horses?
Right. And
You
then
know, it's
like in a lot of American, not just comedy, but like TV shows, they will do what I call expository dialogue, where they like you're watching CSI, and two people who work in a fucking lab, all they do all day long is like do the same job, which is to work on forensics, you know, DNA, something like that. And then while they're doing it, one person will explain to the other person what they're doing and why, how it works and everything. And that there's no fucking reason why this person should have to explain to the other person what they're doing except for the benefit of the audience, right?
well, that's like Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Yeah.
The difference between The Next Generation and the original series, they assumed like that you'd work it out yourself what they're talking about, or you know what they're acting out, and you know it's like The Next Generation. It was especially the later ones. It was like somebody would give some weird analogy, and you think, huh?
Uh-huh.
You know why? You know it's. But then I mean, I come from the like kind of Benny Hill and Two Ronnies and Morecambe and Wise generation, where I mean, some people say Benny Hill was smutty and things. I mean, it was toilet humour, but it was British funny toilet humour.
Benny Hill.
Benny Hill.
Yeah.
I think I sounded right, but say look up Benny Hill. I mean, you can find a lot of his stuff on YouTube. I mean, some of it is kind of it's British, kind of. Some of it's toilet humour, but some of it is really, really funny. And he was a pretty good actor as well. I mean, he did like he was. Did he also get to almost #1, I think, in the charts in Britain with a song called Ernie, the fastest milkman in the West? And if you listen to the words, I mean, I'm not going to spoil it. Listen to the words, and it's really quite funny. And yeah, the Two Ronnies were more kind of safe humour, more family oriented, because they were big on like Saturday evening stuff and Morecambe and Wise and things like that. And I mean, these are all good British humour, but a lot of people don't get it. And I mean, these days, I mean, these things have got warnings on them. It's like, what? Somebody's going to tell a joke about somebody with frizzy hair. Why does it need a warning? I mean, it's only hair, or somebody with ginger hair or things. You know, these kind of things, it's silly things now, but yeah. But British humour and American humour is different. I mean, some of the American humour is like, yeah, it's okay. You know, George Carlin and stuff like that. I mean, he's pretty good, but you know, but some of the newer stuff, it's not funny at all. Change channel.
You have to be like, so for instance, if you're like in Austin, Texas, and you're a new comedian and you're trying to make people laugh in the comedy mothership, right? Mm-hmm. You either have to say things that people in Austin, Texas are going to resonate with specifically, which isn't funny to the rest of the world because they don't understand that context, or you have to figure out a way to make people laugh that doesn't depend on them having a full setup of like everything that you have to say. You, like on Kill Tony, you have a minute to make people laugh, right? So the idea is to get the maximum amount of relatable humor in the shortest amount of time. So like the American comedy style, you know, in England, if you're doing something like Monty Python, you can reasonably assume that everyone has like this amount of education. Like you're going to know who, Margaret Thatcher is. Mm-hmm. And you can make a joke about that. And it's the same in American political humor. You know, you can make a joke about like let's say Kamala Harris, wakes up with a hangover, and she wonders what happened for the last several months. And then if you are tuned into politics, you'll understand that. But if you are someone who doesn't follow politics at all, it makes no sense. You're like, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know what it means.
Well,
it's actually quite funny.
But, oh, wow, it must have been a hell of a party. Yeah, that kind of thing. Or whatever. It's just like very interesting. How if you're a programmer and you're talking to another programmer, right? There's a bunch of things you don't need to explain. You could just say the word and then everybody knows what you're talking about and move on. And then if you're talking to me, you have to talk to me like I'm a fucking 5-year-old. And, well, that actually means, like, for Tyler's sake, that means this. And that's true with pretty much everything. One of the things that I find the most interesting, I play around with like AI, like ChatGPT and Claude a bit. Mm-hmm. And I actually find it sort of refreshing when you're talking to those things that pretty much no matter what subject you want to talk about, there's never a point where you have to stop and explain to it what you're talking about. So if I say to ChatGPT, like, oh, I've been really thinking a lot about Albert Camus' Myth of Sisyphus and how that relates to Zecharia Sitchin's work on the Anunnaki. And if I were talking to most of the people listening or my wife or whoever.
Like me.
Yeah, sure. I've got to stop and explain what I mean by Albert Camus, the Myth of Sisyphus, and Zecharia Sitchin. But the computer just Googles every bit of that in an instant and says, yes, I see what you mean. And that's going to be very interesting as we move forward with like people talking about that. And how does that impact humor? How does that impact storytelling? If you have like everybody in the world has a computer chip in their head, I just got super fucking tinfoil hat really fast. Sorry.
Some people actually want to put a chip in everybody's head.
Yeah.
And it's on video. Anybody that thinks it's a conspiracy theory.
Yeah. Since we're already on the tangent, from your perspective as a programmer and a game designer, how do you feel about AI and like large language models and how they're impacting the world right now?
Garbage in, garbage out.
Okay. Why?
Well, it's already been shown that that depending on the questions you ask and depending who has been supplying these, the networks with the training data, that they can be programmed to be biased.
Yeah.
And, give you the wrong information or give you the current, what's the word I'm looking for? What the powers that be want you to think is happening rather than the reality. Like, the kind of examples I mean, like, no matter how much you mutilate your body, you still are what you're born with, but AI will tell you otherwise. These kind of things. So, like the Scottish government keep on saying that as well, but it doesn't make it true. So that there's kids using it will be given this false sense of reality. And plus, as far as programming is concerned, I mean, they've already tried to get it to write programs, but it's still, you need to have here's another word I'm looking for. I'm showing my age again. It's like, you need to have an idea of what people will enjoy, and that's an emotional state that AI, as far as we know, doesn't have yet. Mm-hmm. So it's like, what makes this game enjoyable? What makes this, this aspect, rubbish? We'll leave that out. We'll put this in. If we do this, people like multiplayer. Can AI write some kind of protocol over, to run over the internet that will prevent cheating and things? Does it know about compressing data and having, checksums and things? I mean, if it's told, but can it actually implement that? But I've seen that, that people have tried it and it's, certain things anyway, and it's just garbage.
Yeah.
So far. And the graphics, the first time I used the AI last week was, I was having a chat on Discord and somebody was, I won't go into detail about what it was, but what I wanted to do was to generate an image of a cup of coffee with mug written on it. and the AI, it was like, it came out like MUCG, and then there's a couple of smaller letters in between. I mean, it was a really lovely picture it generated for me. It's just that the writing on it was just, it was almost there, but it wasn't quite. And it's like, why did they get that wrong? I mean, I've spelled it out for it. I said, a picture of a mug of coffee with mug written on it. So I've spelled it out and it's still got it wrong. So is it just looking at images previously and not looking at the actual text? But after it, I did say, thank you, AI, and it said, you're welcome.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that's a nice touch.
Yeah, it's definitely learned to do that. It's not that it feels gratitude. It's that it's learned that that's the expected response. I like calling it a large language model as opposed to artificial intelligence, pretty much for that reason. I think about it as a model. So yeah, go ahead.
It's a simulation. I mean, it's artificial, but I don't think there's any intelligence behind it yet. It's basically, there's a set of probably a set of neurons that's been trained on particular inputs, and here's where it goes to look for something. I mean, they've been able to decipher English language or whatever language for years on these, like you phone up somebody, you say, say one to get to this department. So it's probably something along the lines of that, where they can decipher part of it, and the rest of it is just what it's been fed. So that picture of a mug was there's probably something similar that's been created out there by somebody, and it's just happened to pick that image because of what I wanted. So I don't think there's any intelligence behind it. I think it's a set of algorithms that happen to look as if it knows what it's doing. Best guess, probably.
I did some experiments with image generation. I think this was with ChatGPT. I lean more towards Claude nowadays, but I was basically saying, like, draw me a model of the planets, and then add in, and I added in a few things. I was like, basically, I want to see what the asteroid belt, like, erase the asteroid belt and put in another planet about the size of Venus, and then I want another planet after Neptune called Nibiru, just because I wanted to, like, visualize what that would look like. And so then and I also told it to, like, make Earth's moon, give it its own planetary orbit. So, like, as if it were not a moon, but in fact another planet between us and Mars.
Yeah.
And it kept giving me really good images, like really pretty pictures, like that looked like these kind of classical maps and everything. But no matter how many times I explained it to it, and no matter how many different ways I explained it to it, it could not seem to understand that planets each have their own orbital plane. So it would just draw them, like, in a circle on the same plane of orbit around the sun, Yeah. And I found that so interesting. And then I would be like, okay, here's another set of instructions. This is exactly what I want you to do, like refining and refining and refining on what I'm asking it to do. And it could tell me verbatim. It could say, okay, I understand now what you want me to do is to create, and then it would, like, list out all of my criteria. And I was like, and I even gave it another image, and I was like, see how the planets have their own orbital plane in a row around the sun. And it would say, yes, I understand that you want the planets to have their own circle, or ellipse around. Yeah. And then I would be like, okay, now process a new image. And it would come back the same way. And I'm like, I'm thinking about this, and I'm like, okay, so it's a language model. It's based on words. It doesn't have eyes. Right. So it's you're asking a blind person you're, like, giving it a description. You're asking a blind person to then draw you a picture. And it's obviously going to make mistakes. And it just because it can reiterate what it is that you've asked doesn't mean that it understands what you've asked.
Yeah.
On a fundamental level. And I think back to when I first got into Air Force weather, we had several different weather models for predicting, like, what the weather was going to be at this location on this day. And that works on a grid system. So it's like, within this pixel, essentially, this is what the weather is most likely to be. Like, if we get a percentage of, the rain percentage for today, it's not how likely is it to happen. It's how much of this area will be rained on, Is
that based on historical data, or does it, or along with the current direction of the clouds and things and cloud cover?
So it takes in a lot of different factors, and people are always saying that eventually this job is going to be fully taken over by, like, the weatherman is going to be taken over by computers, and eventually I think that will happen. But where we stand now is that you have observations. So like every single weather station, every airport in the world, even where there's just like a fucking camera and a sensor, with a wind turbine on it, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
They take an observation every hour or every time something significant changes. And then that observation gets put into the model over and over, every single day, every hour or more. And then based on climatology, so like every observation that's ever been made in that area and whatever the most recent observations were. So the model's usually every like 6 hours, it puts out a new output,
Mm-hmm.
So like the 0 o'clock model will be again adjusted later at 0, 6, 12, 18, and 24, roughly.
Yeah.
And so then, if I come in for the day and I'm going to make a prediction about what the weather's going to be in Glasgow, at 4 p.m. At 12, I'm going to wait for that model to come out, right? And it's going to hopefully be more accurate than the one that came out at 6, and so on and so forth. And then I take the current observation. Like, so if I'm looking on the ground right now in, at the Glasgow airport or whatever, this is what the weather is. And then the model is telling me, from 6 o'clock, okay, at 4 p.m., this is what the weather will be. And then I look at that data and I'm comparing it in real time to what's really happening. And it's 2 degrees off on the temperature or the dew point or wind speed or direction or something like that. Then I would adjust the model to be more in line. So I'm not just taking what the model says and putting that out into the world. I'm saying between what this model says and what reality is, this is the best prediction I can come up with. The Air Force invested in its own model, its own weather model, which was like a huge task. And it was going to be global, and it was going to be higher resolution than any model had ever been before. And at the time, at least in the States, the North American model, or the NAM is what we called it, was like the most used, for obvious reasons. It was funded by the government, it works, etc. And so for the first couple of years, we had the GALM and we had the NAM, and we also had another one called the Global Forecasting System, but we would compare all of them. So like we, the people who were supposed to be doing this stuff, they're like, okay, whenever you get time to do a prediction, you're going to look at all of the models and you're going to compare each of them, and you're going to compare real-time data, and then you're going to make a forecast, and you're going to pick which model's the best, etc., and rate them. And then like in just the 4 years that I did this, the GAL one went from underperforming, like it was really, really stupid. Mm-hmm. Like it would be like 30% off on a lot of factors. Towards the end of that 4 years, it was the best model there is, like by far. It was like outperforming all of them. And the reason for that is it needs data, so as it had more and more and more data and feedback put into it, it got better. So I think that large language models now are impressive in many ways, but as you and I both said, they have many flaws. Like, they're not perfect.
Yeah.
I just think that they will get better. And I don't think that means that they'll become intelligent, or I should say conscious. They won't be like thinking like you and I think, but they'll be better at, okay, every single time someone goes on there and talks to it and gives it, some interaction, it's taking observations. So it's like, it asked me, the person asked me this question or told me to do this. I gave it this answer, and then it responded with either positive or negative feedback. And it's just going to think, okay, I did that. That was negative. I did this was positive. It'll be virtually binary, on each individual subject that it's measuring for, until it gets to the point where, like Tesla's cars only function, the self-driving system uses only visual data. A human being has visual, we have tactile, we have sound, a lot, we have the ability to pivot our heads and all that sort of thing. So we have so many more factors to go off of in terms of what decision to make right now, and then our reaction time. The car doesn't have the reaction time problem, but it does have less sensory input than we do.
Yeah.
But over the years, it has gotten better. The first time somebody tested a Tesla self-driving system versus after several years of hundreds of cars, maybe thousands at this point, on the road, actually doing stuff, it just gotten better. So I hear you when you say garbage in, garbage out in terms of like it won't be intelligent or it won't be conscious. It's not really thinking. But I do think that it will get better at simulating what it's like to have a conversation, or at least better at giving us what we want from it.
Yeah, well, subject to bias, of course, because I mean, people are programming these things, and biases can be built into to push a particular narrative.
Right.
It's like you're saying about the weather. It's I mean, you're saying you could predict the weather with, like say 75% accuracy an hour out from the actual event, but we are expected to believe that some of these supercomputers, which is garbage in, garbage out, because they don't even include the sun and things like that, and like gamma rays and things coming in cloud formation.
Right.
And they're telling us that in 100 years' time, if we don't eat the bugs, we're going to be underwater. It's like, no, that's garbage.
That's what I would call limited data forecasting. So they're making a prediction without taking into account all of the potential factors. So the best weather model in the world, or ever created, ideally in my mind, would not just it would take into account the tilt of the Earth, the seasonal changes, the solar cycles, all of astrology, every bit of it would all be in part of that model, and you would need eons of data to be accurate about that. So yeah, of course, like I could say, based on the last 150 years of weather data that we have inputted into this model, next year on December 7th at 5:22 p.m. in Glasgow, this will be the weather, most likely, with 80-90% accuracy. But all it would take would be a solar flare to change that, because the model's not predicting that. It's not going to take that into account.
Mm-hmm. Because even the last couple of days, it was supposed to be snowing here, and I'd actually changed plans because it was going to be heavy snow. And as it get closer to its predicted time, I think it was something like 4 p.m. or something, Rachel and I were going to go somewhere, and we just changed the plans not to.
Right.
And it turns out it just rained. So an hour out, it was completely wrong. So, I mean, it was supposed to be snowing last night, and I woke up this morning, it was completely dry. So, I mean, this is the Scottish weather is, I mean, it is extremely unpredictable, but it's predictable to an extent that in winter you get like 90, 100 mile an hour gusts as normal. Because I remember like chimneys getting blown down. I mean, Glasgow made it, was it in the early 80s or something? It's like there's a lot of tenements in Glasgow, and they all had like tall chimney stacks on them. So they went round and they chopped like 2/3 of them off and reduced the height of them, because so many were getting blown over, because like these tenements are 100 years old. But it's because they'd observed that the weather would occasionally blow one over and, land in somebody's bedroom while they were in bed, and kill them. So that's what they did. They reduced the height of them all. But but that kind of weather is perfectly normal here. But they make out as if they're naming the storms now, and it's like, oh, climate's changing. Well, yeah, maybe it is, but nothing to do with man, I don't think.
It's interesting because Scotland is on the north side of a continent with water on all sides of it, right? And it's also, you have mountains, so you're going to have very different weather based on your elevation. The terrain can also influence the direction of the wind, etc. But generally speaking, you're going to have wind flow from the north down, coming from Greenland through the current down towards Scotland, and all of Scandinavia and Northern Europe, Denmark, etc. And then something to consider is that so if you are, let's say, in I'm going to say Kansas, right? Every single weather station between Denver and Topeka, right, is data that you can input and continue to monitor a storm system across that flat terrain until it gets to where you're at. And you can very accurately forecast that. You can watch it on radar. I mean, I don't even need a fucking model to tell me like the storm's going to hit at this time. If I can pull up the satellite and the radar and like say like, well, this is how fast it's moving and this is how many hours you have until it hits us. And the temperature and the winds are like this there, so it's very likely it'll be like that when it gets here. Whereas for you guys, there's you, and then there's a bunch of ocean, there's Iceland, and then there's Greenland. And Iceland and Greenland are not exactly covered with airports or weather stations to take observations. And other, aside from buoys and Navy shit, maybe in the Faroe Islands or whatever, you got nothing to go on. So by the time a storm system hits you, you don't have as much data to predict on, plus it's going to hit the highlands, and then it's going to hit you.
But then the thing is you can't predict a storm 100 years out. You can predict the possibility there may be one. But
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
if a storm appears, as just in your example, the storm is there. I mean, it's a simple calculation. How far it travels over a certain time is very simple calculation. It's like the DST triangle. Speed is equal to distance over time. Distance equal is time, speed and stuff like that. So that's easy to calculate, but you can't do that until the storm appears. There's a likelihood of a storm appearing at a particular time of the year based on, how warm the air is at ground level and upper levels and things. But you can't predict that there's certainly going to be one next week.
No.
You can predict the likelihood, but the further out your prediction is, the likelihood is going to get less and less.
Right. And that has to do with, there's just, what I guess the point I'm trying to make is that there's so many factors that don't get implemented into the prediction that to say that the prediction would ever be 100% accurate. It's like the only way you're going to have a 100% accurate prediction is if you have every single possible factor in your accounted for in your prediction, which we're not there yet. But we can assume that with more data, you will get better and better outcomes. So,
but then you also have chaos to bring into that. It's the old like butterfly in Central Park causing a storm, over, like China or something like that.
Right.
So that alters all the air patterns around that local area, which can then spread out and cause other knock-on effects that get bigger and bigger.
Right.
So,
speaking of AI, one of the things that pissed me off the most about the reactions to Kingpin was people insisting that everything in the game was, like all of the art in the game was AI upscaled.
No, it wasn't.
And I just want to, on the record, shout out to, I've already said everybody's names, but like Eduardo, Jorge, and fucking Carlos worked their asses off for literally years to make every single texture in that game. And then for someone to just like dismiss it. I'm like, I kept saying this to different people too, because it was at the time my job to do like influencer outreach. I was like, I don't mind you saying that you hate the game. I don't mind you pointing out any flaw that you see in it whatsoever. But like when you're literally just, you don't know what you're talking about and you're literally saying that something that isn't true, that is going to upset me. Like it's going to incentivize me to not give you the game early again in the future,
Yeah.
Because it's one thing if you just didn't like it, and I'll be like, yeah, I get that, man. These are your issues with it, whatever. But it's a totally different thing if you're like just blatantly lying about it.
Yeah. Or using a pre-build that they were told not to use.
Yeah. That too.
Yeah.
That too.
We won't mention who it was that did that. You can mention it if you want. I won't mention it.
That would be really unprofessional of me, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would be. Man, it'd be a horrible thing.
Nevertheless, those reviews will live on. So,
yes, but to clarify something, I did clarify one time on one of the streams, the Twitch streams. A couple of the skyboxes were because of the size of them, and they were missed because what would happen is, I think is what happened on these like 3 or 4 instances. They were expanded, obviously they were rescaled, and then they were supposed to be drawn over. So you'd have the basic shape of the things, and then they would, the detail would be filled in, and that was missed on a couple. So I think I mentioned that back at the time because
yeah.
So it was, I mean, if I was doing a picture, if I was rescaling it, I mean, obviously I wouldn't, draw certainly something like the size of a skybox. I wouldn't do that all by hand, where I can, you know, I can use a program to stretch it, and then I would fill in the details, you know, that would then be missing. So
I just find it interesting the way that, because it's a big controversy, especially amongst artists right now. Like we have this mass of people who have like left X.com to go to Blue Sky and such because they're concerned about Grok being trained on their art, etc.
mm-hmm.
And I have a laundry list of arguments to that, but well,
yeah, and as if Blue Sky aren't going to be doing that as well. So
as if Grok or any other AI can't just use Google and find everything on the internet. Just because it's on Blue Sky doesn't mean they're not taking it into account. It's just I'm gonna leave that aside for a different day. Well, I'll have a whole other episode about like why artists leaving X, or I'm not gonna say stupid. I'm just, because they're not stupid. I'll just be like, you're playing yourself if you think that's a solution to the problem that you're trying to fight. Actually, I'm almost certainly going to have that discussion with another guest pretty soon. But
yeah, that'd be an interesting one, because I did read actually, it's all these people going to Blue Sky, you know, they're you know, apparently mostly on, you know, what you class as the left of the political spectrum.
Sure.
And they're now complaining about how toxic Blue Sky is because they're all trying to cancel each other.
Oh yeah.
And now X is like, everybody's all, oh, thank God they're gone. You know, we can now talk like adults.
It's really interesting how like a lot of the accounts on Blue Sky are in fact people who are opposed to the people who are like, so I'm saying I believe in this politically, I'm going to go to Blue Sky to show my, I don't believe in that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens is a bunch of fucking right-wing trolls just go make Blue Sky accounts and troll those people. It's like, it's really sad. It's really shitty behavior, but I mean, like it's of course that's going to happen.
Yeah, but it's the same as what the left did on X. I mean, they were, creating accounts and all the bots. Remember, was it Elon Musk found millions of bots? Yeah. And they were all like attacking anybody that said anything remotely right wing. And
there was also the other way around. Like, so I remember, I think it was you and me, like in our Discord chat, we're talking about about people going to Blue Sky. And I don't care what fucking social media people use. I'm just saying, like, as a marketing professional, I want to reach the maximum amount of people as possible. So I'm not going to run away from one, because a few people decided they don't like it anymore. I'll just do both. But with Blue Sky in particular, I remember people talking about how, like, back in, a couple years ago, if people were like left Twitter because the left side of, like the people who were in charge of it were extremely leftist and they were attacking everyone who said anything remotely conservative, or banning their accounts or whatever. And then everybody goes to, all of those people who go to like Mastodon or, what some other social media platform. And then people would say, oh, it's just a right-wing echo chamber. And I'm like, no, what these people on this platform have in common is not that they are right-wing. It's that they cannot use Twitter. Mm-hmm. That's what they have in common. So just because they have all these other factors in common doesn't mean that the through line here is they didn't feel at home on Twitter. And then now where we're at is like all of these people go to Blue Sky. And then people will say, like, I think even you had mentioned, like, isn't that kind of like a left-wing echo chamber? And I'm like, again, it's not because they're left. It's because they don't feel at home on Twitter. So it's just going to go back and forth. It's like, and I hate the whole idea that it has to be about your political beliefs. I'm like, I think it just has to do with you left because you weren't getting told, or, they were doing something you didn't like. So there could be right-wing people on
echo chamber.
Yeah. Yeah. And then they create their own echo chamber by just choosing not to participate in a bigger conversation. But it's weird. And a lot of people have already come back to X, like, very fast. Like, I think I said that too, like, right before, like, I was like, I bet you after the election, shit calms down.
Yeah. Well, let's hope it does continue to calm down, because it's there's things that are too polarized at the moment. So I mean, I would like to be able to. I mean, obviously there's obvious things you wouldn't say, but some people are taking things too far.
Yeah,
and an innocent comment would be, somebody would jump on that. I don't know if you've heard the thing about, if you had a MasterChef, it's like there's all these people coming out of the woodwork from like 10, 15 years ago, saying that one of the commentators on that, Greg Wallace, he's like, they're making it as if he's raped and murdered people, when all he's done is basically, as far as I can gather, he's like, he's done a couple of inappropriate things, but most of it is just, like he maybe told somebody a dirty joke, that maybe he didn't ask them first, would you like to hear a dirty joke? And he just told it and assumed that, they wouldn't bother. I mean, it was so, like, it's for 10 years they didn't bother until one person came out, and then somebody else has come out, and somebody else has come out, and it's like the whole, why wait till now,
I think it's not, because you have to have the ability for people to come out and talk about things, because there's always going to be situations where folks they don't feel like they can speak out, if they're being wronged or whatever. Same way you and me aren't going to talk about certain subjects on the show just because it's like, you're going to try to get hired at some other company. Maybe that's not the thing you want to go down. You want, whatever. So I get why there's that. And I think that there should be ways for people to be able to, like, hey, that guy raped me too, or whatever, like, and come out about it. But it doesn't mean that you throw the baby out with the bathwater in terms of, like, I think we need to be very precise about what it is we're accusing someone of. And then before we, like, demonize them entirely, because contrary example, I remember when Bill Cosby first got outed, and I did not believe it. I was like, there's no way. And then after a while, I'm like, okay, the evidence is kind of overwhelming.
Yeah.
And, it could be anybody for all I know. It could be, someone who I know and love and trust, like Bill Cosby, whatever. Because I knew him so well.
Yeah, I remember watching the Cosby Show as well, but the thing is, it's like, back then there was more likely to be innocent until proven guilty. I mean, now these people are calling for the BBC never to show his face again and erase him from past things. It's like, no, it's for telling a couple of dirty jokes, and maybe, apparently one person said he rubbed up against him for a couple of seconds, and it's like, well, if I walk through a crowded room, I might, accidentally touch somebody, or somebody might accidentally touch me. It's like, if you're in a close proximity with somebody, your arm might touch their arm. I mean, is that assault?
Well, people will forget and move on as soon as they find another thing to be upset about. This will not be in the news cycle anymore. It's actually really disappointing to see how that happens. Like,
yeah.
I mean, Bill Cosby was so egregious, we're still talking about it, and it's been like, what, 10 years or something. But then there's all these examples. Look, a couple weeks ago, me and everybody else in the world tuned in to watch Mike Tyson's last fight on Netflix. And it was a disaster, of course. But the thing is, Mike Tyson is a convicted rapist. I'm sorry. Don't quote me. He's a convicted rapist. And everyone has decided collectively, either they forgot, which is more likely, or they're like, okay, he served his time, he learned his lesson, he's a better man now. I want to watch him fight. Or they care more about the fight than they do about who this person is morally. And they don't think about, how much money am I giving to this convicted rapist? And I'm not even dissing Mike Tyson. I'm just saying this is a fact,
Yeah.
And then, how long did it take for people to forget about that? It's insane. I find it hilarious now when, like, Snoop Dogg is on a fucking, TV commercial that my grandma's like, oh, it's Snoop Dogg. And I'm like, 20 years ago, that dude was a fucking, still wears all the same, like, that guy's a Crip, gangbanger, murderer, criminal, like, for real. And now he's America's mascot. And I got nothing against Snoop Dogg. Love his music. Think he's really cool and everything. But it's just amazing to me how quickly people forgive when all they really do is forget. They just move on.
Or is it selective outrage?
Also true, I think. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of this selective cancel culture here. I mean, is this a distraction? I mean, the current government, or the current regime in Britain, is they basically went against everything that they promised. I mean, people are actually wanting rid of them already. I mean, there's millions of people signing a petition for a new election because they're basically, it's a bunch of communists basically destroying the country. It's obvious even after like 5-6 months since they were voted in.
Yeah.
And it's these things are distractions from that. We're talking about some guy on a cooking program rather than the fact that the government themselves admitted that thousands more old age pensioners are going to die this winter because they will choose between the heating and eating their houses because their winter fuel allowance, because some parts of Britain can get extremely cold in the winter.
Yep.
And they have taken this allowance away knowing that more people will die because of it, and they don't give a shit. So is this a distraction? I mean, this is the current, I mean, I don't call them a government, and they were voted in by like 20% of the population. And it's they're just going full out, they've paid off the unions, and there's this big black collar money. It's like, no, well, it's there because you've given half of it away to, 15 billion to Africa and 5 billion to the train drivers and doctors.
Right.
And it's like, so these, I can see the cynic in me thinks things like this are a distraction. Something that's going on in the background that they don't want us to see at this point. And this is, because the sacrificial lamb, it could be that. That's why all these people are just coming out. I mean, well, they did do it, and there's no smoke without fire sometimes, but it's constant all the time. It's just too much.
Here's an interesting question that I don't think I've ever gotten a chance to ask before, but since you live there, what's the deal with like how Scottish independence seems to be something a lot of people want, like as in like Ireland to like not be part of the UK. And I don't understand. I understand the idea of like not wanting to be part of a government, but like, what's the actual situation like on the ground versus just like what gets portrayed to us?
Well, the independence thing will probably never happen because what the SNP have basically shouted for years for, they wanted a referendum. They got it.
That's the Scottish National Party?
Yes.
Okay.
They're currently in charge in Scotland, but I think they're probably going to be out next election, but I think that's the next year or the year after.
Okay.
Anyway, what they said was they wanted a referendum and they would abide by the result, and it would be once in a generation. Now, we had the referendum and they lost. The majority of people voted to stay part of the United Kingdom. So ever since then, we need to have another referendum. No, well, you said you agreed once in a generation. That's like 25 years. So they're still going on about it. They're spending apparently they've been keeping millions of pounds back in their so-called war chest for this independence push that they're going to do yet again, that the people have overwhelmingly rejected multiple times. I mean, one referendum and everybody's saying, can they just forget about it? We've had this conversation, we're staying with Britain, and that's it. So they want is what they call independence within Europe. So they want to join the EU again, but the EU have already said no, because Scotland would be receiving money from the EU because there's only 5 million people here, so there's no way we could pay our way. So it's a dead duck, basically, but they're still going on about it. And if we're to vote again, I would vote to remain again.
That's interesting. Because I guess where I'm coming from here is like you were saying how the government there is sort of only really controlled by like 20% of the population, if I understood you correctly.
Well, only 20% roughly voted for them, which is something like, what was it? There's 2 numbers bandied about. There's one that's like 20% and one that's like around about 35%. I think there's one of them is like the number of eligible voters, and one is the the percentage of the actual population. So they were elected on a minority, and it's there wasn't many people voted for them at all. And they're throwing money at everything that they shouldn't be throwing money at. They're going to, there's going to be solar panels and windmills everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's basically, I mean, I got a leaflet, this is how bad it is. I got a leaflet through the door a couple of months ago, and it was about, how to deal with a blackout, a power cut. It's like, well, hold on a minute. We used to have nuclear reactors. We used to have, coal-fired power stations. There's one now that used to be coal, and I think, and they've now changed it to to what they call biomass, which is basically they chop down trees in North America, mince them up, glue them together into little pellets, ship them across the Atlantic, take them on a train down to, I think it's Drax or something like that down in England, and then they burn them, and they call that clean energy because it's biomass, and it's just a complete piece of garbage. So anyway, they're actually demolishing these power stations so they can't be used again. And they're not building any more nuclear ones because, apparently nuclear isn't green because, for whatever reason, they don't like nuclear. And so I'm thinking 2024, I haven't had a blackout since the 1970s. Like a deliberate blackout. Maybe, if occasionally you get a power cut, like somebody cuts a cable when they're digging up a road or something. But the last time we had significant power cuts in Scotland was during the miners' strikes in the 70s. And to get a leaflet how to deal with a power cut is like, they obviously know something's coming. When the wind doesn't blow here, there's windmills all over Scotland and they don't turn, so there's no energy getting generated. Solar panels, Scotland is not the place to have solar panels because it's cloudy. We get it's a bit of an exaggeration, but we get 10 really sunny days and then the rest of the days are, maybe overcast, or we may get a bit of clear sky, but then it's mostly cloudy because of where we are in the North Atlantic. So it's just a joke. So we're basically going backwards. And all for this mythical so-called global boiling, the climate crisis we're in just now, whereas the weather is exactly the same as it was, it's actually colder than it was 2,000 years ago. When the Romans were here, they were growing grapes, halfway up Britain, because it was so warm. So
that is so interesting. I've never had this thought come to mind until right now. So here, congratulations, 29 years of not thinking about this. So in the States, we have essentially two parties, right? And I remember that there's this part of history where Theodore Roosevelt, right, basically couldn't get nominated again for the Republican Party, so he ran with a separate party called the Bull Moose Party, and it split the vote, So in America, we always talk about this, splitting the vote, where basically you need roughly 51% of voters to win an election, right?
Yeah.
And if you go to the other side and half of the people who would have voted for the other side vote for one thing and then half of them vote for another thing, now you've got the other side's going to get the majority, period. You're just going to lose by dividing yourself. Divide and conquer. If you have 15 parties like Denmark does, you only need 7% of people to agree on something to make it into office.
Yeah.
And so if 7% of people in your country, so if you have 15 parties and every single one of them is for one thing, and then that one party is for this opposing point of view, and they get 7% of people to agree on that and all join that one party and vote on it, then the actual majority of the people lose out on their issue for 7% of the population. I've never thought about that until you just kind of painted this picture for me.
Yeah. It's a similar situation in Scotland because for whatever reason, the powers that be decided that we would have proportional representation, which was supposed to avoid having one party take over. And so there's going to be all coalitions all the time. But what happened roughly 15 years ago, I don't want anybody to say, no, it was 14 or 16 or whatever. Roughly 15 years ago, the SNP basically won a landslide, and they've been in control ever since. And because the other parties are just so bad. There's the Conservatives, Labour, who are basically, the Conservatives are Labour light now. They're kind of pretty, they're on the left now. And the Tory wets, they call them. There's not many, the real Conservatives, a lot of them have been forced out. Labour are basically borderline communists. The Greens, the Green Party, they are communists because they want us all living in caves. So they don't want any, they don't want oil, they don't want, any artificial, it's, to listen to them, you'd think, these people have seriously got something wrong with them. How can they survive with having no electricity, no gas, no heating? Even a heat pump needs electricity. Where's the electricity going to come from? Unicorn farts or something? It's explain how you're going to achieve this. And it's like, you're a racist. You know, that's the kind of the child, you know, the kiddie thing that we're dealing with up in Scotland here. So it just makes chaos. And the roads are full of potholes and stuff. So that's why, to get back to my original point, there will never be any vote for independence for Scotland. Because, for one, we rely on English money to survive. Because the North Sea oil money has been basically sold to private industry.
That is wild. I'm like seriously like just having like a revelation in my head of like how simple it would be to push a minimalist idea by just getting, in my example, it was 15 parties, but I mean like whatever division you want to make of it. You don't need that many people to change the leadership of a country, even in a democratic system. Yeah, Americans totally don't even think about this shit. We just have two big fucking parties, and neither one of them like us. It's so funny.
Well, it's always a case of, in here, it's like, you don't really vote for the party that you want because you don't want any of them. You vote against the party you want the least.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of strategic voting here. And it's like, that's why there's a new political party called Reform here, and they did extremely well in the last election, and they are, by all accounts and multiple commentators, expected to probably win the next election unless it is stolen from them. Because, America isn't the only country that's got a problem with votes. So
yeah, it's very interesting. Like how shit. I mean, look at it like it's a game.
Yeah. Which also goes back to the Scottish independence thing, which is what the SNP want, to vote again and again until they get the answer they want. And then if they get the yes vote, there will never be another vote again. So that goes full circle.
We got like probably maybe 5 or so more minutes before I gotta go on a date. So I guess like all of that aside, just to someone out there who's interested in doing what you do, like in reverse engineering games or just being a game designer in general, like what life lessons do you think they could maybe take something away from?
Study at school, and especially maths. That's the one thing that I've got from programming is unless you're going to let some like game engine do it all for you, you need to know your maths. I mean, like dot products, I mean, that's used all the time in colors, and cross products and things like that. I mean, even if you want to write your own shaders for like transport, you're going to have to at least know how light bounces about. And what else? You need to learn the language, the nuances of the language as well. I mean, it's surprising how many people don't know what a pointer is. And then you mentioned, have you ever heard of a pointer to a pointer? And it's like, no. Which is surprising for programmers. And what else? Binary space partition trees, these kind of things. I mean, you need to learn technique as well. I mean, even if you don't actually need to write your own routine to walk a BSP tree or build one, to know the basics of it is handy. Because yet again, this is all classifying, what side of a plane you're on and things. So you need to know what a plane is. You don't know how to classify a side. You need to know how to, is a point on a plane or is it front and back? These kind of things. So, in practice, a lot of practice. See, we found out at the start of this chat, I've been programming since I was 12. And I still don't think I'm a very good programmer because I haven't made millions off it yet. So, I mean, I'm not working for, like Microsoft or anything. My life just hasn't taken me that way, but...
Before we go, can you tell me the story about the satellite situation?
The satellite situation?
Yeah, you told me you got into we can cut this if you don't want it in here, but you told me you got into some trouble in your younger days from something to do with a satellite.
Oh, I used to be in one of my kind of less academic jobs, before I went and did my degree, I used to, install satellite dishes it was like for a company that was like subcontracted to Sky Television, and eventually Sky Television in the UK bought them. And I actually worked for them twice. So I just go around to people's houses and install satellite dishes, and get into trouble. Um, maybe there's something else. Oh, when I tried to crack the video crypt encryption, and I managed to do it for 5 seconds, by injecting signals into a decoder box. That could have been it.
That might have been it. It's so interesting. Like most of like the genius programmers that you hear about that like make a big headway in the world, like they do something like that. Where there's that famous story of like John Carmack. He basically like stole a bunch of shit from the company that they were working for in order to be able to like not stole their like intellectual property, but like literally moved computers out of the building and into the id Software rooms overnight to work, and then would put it back, or like there's always like the FBI or the CIA hires some kid who like managed to hack into the Pentagon from his high school computer, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I've never been that lucky.
Don't do that, kids. Don't do that.
No, that's although occasionally they do seem to advertise for people that potentially could be able to do that. Mm-hmm. So I mean, a decent job like that in government would probably pay quite well, I'd imagine.
Man,
it beats contracting sometimes, I think, which the line of work we're in seems to be headed. Although you have your own company now, so that's good.
Hell yeah.
On that.
Thank you very much.
One of these days in between leaving Slipgate and now, I've actually designed a couple of games, and I've actually started writing some of them. So it's got to keep the practice in.
And when you get ready to put them out and you're looking to advertise them, you come advertise them on the show and also talk to me privately.
Yeah, possibility is always there. It's because my goal is to actually publish one of the games that I've written. I've got a few games that are like they're at prototype stage. They're playable, but there's no graphics there, or it's just blockouts and things. So eventually, I want to be able to finish one to such a point where I could put it up on Steam or something. I could certainly put up like my first program games, where it's very simple, but I want to do something a bit more, something along the level of Kingpin Reloaded. So something complicated and nice. I'll get there.
Dude, I believe in
nothing
you.
Else. It's I'm sure if I'm getting to that point, I will certainly I'll be asking you the pertinent questions regarding promotion and money. Important things.
Now I've got a lot of cool stuff on the horizon. In the Keep, obviously, we have Stellar Valkyrie is going to come out hopefully soon, and then Call of Ragnar is going to be a years-long big project still. But other things like not just like the studio, but like marketing, publishing side stuff. So I'm really excited to start talking about more of that. Hey folks, if you're out there and you're hearing this, go buy yourself a copy of SWAT Fire. It's available right now on Steam for $9.99. Probably on sale for Christmas. Who knows? But yeah, I'm really happy about working for myself, and honestly, like the team we have is a lot of people that have come from being laid off in the last couple of years or whatever, and I think that's a positive thing for the industry as a whole. As much as it sucked to have these mass layoffs, it's like so many great new studios are going to be the result of people, rising from the ashes. So
yeah,
a lot of cool games.
Yeah, let's hope we can all make a living from it.
We're going to figure out, we're all going to live. Man, we're definitely not going down without a fight, so.
No. We all have our talents and we can all use them to help each other.
big thank you to my brother Robert for spending some time with me. This was super cool just to catch up and reminisce about old times in a way. So I hope y'all enjoyed it. Definitely make sure you're following Robert everywhere you can. Check out his website. All the links will be in the show notes. I want to say a big thank you to everybody who supports this show over on Patreon. So thank you very much to Shannon, Ant, Michael, Fred, and Brad. And if you'd like to be mentioned on that list, all you gotta do is become a paid member of our Patreon, of course. Yeah, and links to that are at inthekeep.com on the support page, or any other way that you wish to support. And also, the best way you can support is to let other people know that you like this show and recommend it to them. So if you hear an episode like this one that you really vibe with, maybe, grab that link, send it to somebody that you also think would like it, and take a moment to leave a review or something on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, wherever. Comments, likes, it all matters. I know it seems so silly, but it does help. I love you. God loves you. Stay in the keep.